The students in today's class will try to understand the stress responses and the hormonal control and the factor associated with the cope up of the stress response and the challenge. As you know, already discussed with a bit that the stress may be of two types. One is known as the eustress and other is known as distress. Eustress is a performance pressure, something that challenge your mind and your body, and in return, the body responded by increasing the efficiency of all the system. So eustress is helpful and it enable us to cope up with the everyday challenges and stresses of routine and our job and our work. However, when the stress is overwhelming and the body responses towards is will not be beneficial anymore, rather it will exhaust the systems and eventually the body will lead to disorder from the continuous exposure towards the stress, then it is known as distress. So it is any type of the harmful stress that may damage the organ, the system, the whole body in any way, and we have physical and the mental stresses all over ourselves, which are uh, the causative agent of many kind of the diseases. Now it is being researched that the stresses are also the underlying cause of different kind of organic diseases, that is diseases related to the organs as well as certain kind of the cancers. So it is very important to understand that the stress is a normal thing and the stress response of the body is a method, a technique to cope up with the stresses, and we have a specific system that will help us to cope up with the challenge. But when the stresses will be prolonged and definitely decreases the efficiency of the stress responses through the system, then we will have some kind of the problem related to the stress. So there are three major types of the uh, stresses response, or we can say the three stages of the stress response. First stage is always governed by the fight and flight response, and that is the response which is governed by the sympathetic nervous system and which is governed by the effects of epinephrine and non-epinephrine. It is the first stage of the stress response and stimulates the body resources for immediate stimulate the body's resources uh, to spare itself for the immediate activity. However, when the stress will be going on, then the second step of the stress response appears, and that is known as the resistance reaction. And in that resistance reaction, it is very important that instead of the critical role of epinephrine and non-epinephrine, like it was in the first stage of fight and flight, now its work will be taken up by the cortisol, which is the primarily stress hormone. So, as we have discussed earlier, that the neurotransmitters have short-lived and they are very active in producing the response, but their response will be short-lived, and sooner or later, their response will be taken up by different kinds of the hormones or endocrine system. So here the effect of the adrenaline will be prolonged and the effects of the adrenaline will be compensated with the effects of the stress hormone. Uh, but the third stage of the stress response, which is not shown over here, is known as exhaustion. Exhaustion is the last stage of the stress response, in which whenever there is continuous or prolonged stresses, then the body's system, the stress response mechanism, and the hormonal levels will be which is continuously increased, then drop down, and it also decreases the body's ability to cope up with the upcoming challenge or the stress. So in the exhaustion phase of the or last phase of the stress response, now the systems are no longer able to cope up with the challenges efficiently, and that will result in the exhaustion of the systems and the organs, and resulting in different kind of the diseases. Like very important phenomena is the stress response induced diabetes, because initially the stress responses increases the blood sugar level, and then from the blood sugar level, high in blood sugar level increases the activity of the secretion of activity and secretion of the insulin as well, and then insulin takes the extra amount of the glucose toward the brain and toward the other cells of the body which are working like liver and muscles. That energy will be produced, but increased sugar will then decreases the overall releases of the insulin, because the insulin stores of the beta cells of islets of the Langerhans, and they are going to deplete down. And also, whenever there is more and more insulin towards its receptor, that will create a desensitization or down regulation of the receptors. We have discussed that the phenomena earlier, that when the agonist is continuously exciting the cell in response to save itself from the exhaustion, the receptors they get inside the cell in the form of the down regulation, and resultant will be the decreased responsiveness of the cell, so which is known as desensitization or down regulation. So that down regulation appears. So now the insulin is no more sensitive toward its receptor, and decrease in the sensitivity of the insulin toward the receptor, and decrease in the levels and secretions of the insulin, both will be the major cause of the diabetes mellitus. So this is a connection, that how the prolonged stress will cause the exhaustion, and the exhaustion phase is then followed by different kind of the diseases. Now, coming to the next slide, you can see the next slide over here. Uh, Prior to start, we'll first go through the key. The CRH, as we have told you earlier, the hormone which is related to the corticotropin releases, corticotropin releasing hormone. ACTH is a pituitary hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone. GHRH is a growth hormone releasing hormone. GH, human growth hormone, is HGH. TRH is thyroid releasing hormone, and TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. So you can see three hormones here are released from the hypothalamus, and three hormones are the tropic hormones, which are released from the pituitary and act on specific types of glands that will release different kinds of the hormone. Then Taha is asking that the decreased sensitivity to insulin can be normalized, or it will be remain permanent. This is a very good question. Generally, when the desensitization occur, it won't be correct by itself if it is to an extent. So in that case, we have to give different kind of the drug which are known as insulin sensitizers. Insulin sensitizers, and those insulin sensitizer drug increases the activity of the insulin. So natural coming back to its normal state, it can be happen, but it happened very slow, and in that meantime you require the drug support. Very important drug of the diabetes, glucophage, which is metformin hydrochloride. Glucophage works through that mechanism in which increases sensitivity of the insulin, is a primary mechanism, and that is created by insulin sensitizers. So, students, you can see over here that whenever there is some kind of the stressor or the stimulus that create the stress, initially the first response will be through the nerve impulses. You can see through nerve impulses. You can see my cursor over here. Sympathetic centers in the spinal cord get activated. Sympathetic nerves get activated. Not only when the activation of the sympathetic nerves are there, from there adrenaline and adrenaline is going to be releases, and that will cause the visceral effects. However, to increase the level and prolong the response, the sympathetic nerve also activate the adrenal medulla, and from there increased quantities of epinephrine and norepinephrine will be released from the adrenal medulla. So sympathetic nerves releases the epinephrine or epinephrine. Also, they activate the adrenal medulla to release excessive epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, here is a Here at the level of the adrenal medulla, it acts like a hormone. When it is with the nerves, sympathetic nerves, it acts like a neurotransmitter. And what happened? The stress responses of the epinephrine and non-epinephrine, also known as uh, catecholamines, they increase heart rate. That is positive inotropic effect and increase force of beating of the heart. And also the positive inotropic effect is increase the contraction force of the heart and increase the rate of the heart is known as the positive chronotropic effect. Construction of the blood vessels will be done. That is vasoconstriction. So increase the blood pressure in the peripheral blood vessels. Dilation of the blood vessels that are taking blood towards the heart, lungs, brain, and skeletal muscles. They are dilated to have more and more oxygenated blood to have more and more activity. Then contraction of the spleen occurs. Conversion of the glycogen into glucose, that is glycogenolysis occurs, that increases the blood sugar level. Sweating will be there because the body metabolic rate is now increased, so the more heat is generated. In order to cool down the body, sweating will be continued. Dilation of the air vessels, that is a bronchodilation occurs, and that bronchodilation is responsible for taking increased amount of the oxygen from the atmosphere, and that oxygen will then combine with the glucose present in the blood to form energy. Then we have decrease in the digestive activities, decrease in all those activities which are no longer required for a fight and flight mechanism, like digestion, reproduction, sometimes excretion. So all those systems will be down temporarily, and water retention is there to increase the blood pressure, to elevate the blood pressure. So these responses will be there, that is not only produced by the epinephrine releases from the sympathetic nerves, also they will be having increased quantities of epinephrine and non-epinephrine releasing as a hormone from the adrenal medulla, and they supplement and prolong the fight and flight response. So this is the first thing. The green arrow you can see, this is the first thing. Simultaneously, what happened, that the stressor stimulates the CRH, stimulate the hypothalamus to release the CRH and GHRH and TRH. Okay. So what happened? When the hypothalamus releases the corticotropin releasing hormone, you can see that will act on the corticotrop cells of the anterior pituitary, and that will release the adrenocorticotropic hormone. Similarly, the hypothalamus also going to release the growth hormone releasing hormone that will affect the somatotroph cells and release the human growth hormone. And the TRH, upon the stimulation of the stressor by the stressor, the hypothalamus will going to release the thyrotropin releasing hormone that affects the thyrotroph cells of the anterior pituitary, and as a result, the the pituitary is going to release the thyroid stimulating hormone TSH. Now that TSH, that affects the thyroid gland follicular cells, and that follicular cells will going to release triiodothyronine and thyroxine T3 and T4. And T3 and T4 uh, increases the basal metabolic rate, calorogenic effect, and increase the sensitivity of the catecholamine towards their receptors, and eventually that will increases the body's activity to generate more and more energy, because through that T3 and T4, the basal metabolic rate will be increases. So more metabolic processes, more combustion of food, that is oxidation of the food, and resultant will be more and more ATP formation. Now the question I have, that how decreased digestive activity helps in bringing glucose level back to the normal. Again, is an interesting thing. See, when the stress is going on, actually the digestive activities are suppressed. The appetite is also suppressed. You don't need to eat in that phase because you are not concerned to eat. You are having different kinds of stresses in your mind. Let's suppose when you are having a stress that you have exam in 1 hour, so your focus will be to remember more and more things and to memorize things, not to eat something to aid up your system. So what happened that the blood glucose level will again be raised, not by the digestive properties, however by the glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. And these processes are governed initially by the adrenaline, and formally by, and after that by the cortisols and the stress hormones. So the body's resources are then confined to those systems only which are there to help in the fight and flight and stress responses. Whenever the bodies get normal, then the reproductive activity, excretory activity, digestive activity will be enables and will be started to have the function normally. However, the stress responses, when they are gone, so the increased activity of the lungs and the skeletal muscles and the liver, they are going to be normalized again. In the stress responses, they are going to be a high up in that. Then the human growth hormone. There is another question. Initially, how will we know that we have eustress or distress? If the performance of the body is increased, then it is eustress. And eventually, if the performance of the body or the organ will be decreased after prolonged exposure to the stress, then it is distress. Distress is harmful. Eustress is a performance pressure and it increases the activity of the body. Now, another question is how we can prepare our body to work properly in the stress condition. Again, it is a important question, but its answer is not dependent on the physiology of that, because when you are having such kind of stresses, generally it is not under your control. It is the under control of the nervous system as well as the control of the endocrine system. You cannot control the hormonal responses by your will. However, the people say that in order to control the stress responses, you have to control the body's metabolic activity. And one thing to control, if it can be controlled, is through the conditioning of the mind and slowing down the respiration pattern by means of yoga, by means of aerobic, to slow down or calm down. To slow down and calm down the respiratory rate. When the respiratory rate will be slowed down, eventually the breath rate will be slowed down. When the breath rate will be slowed down, then the stress responses and the fight and flight mechanism will be a bit slightly slowed down. Okay, stress response is not same as the homeostasis. Okay, stress responses is that thing that activates the homeostasis towards the upside. ठीक है, इसमें ये होता है कि होमियोस्टेसिस जो है वो डिस्टर्ब होता है और हायर लेवल्स पे फाइट एंड फ्लाइट और स्ट्रेस के जवाब देने पे स्ट्रेस रिस्पॉन्स पे सेट हो जाता है. So difference between the normal homeostasis and the stress responses. ओके, तो उम्मीद है कि आपके सवालात के जवाब मिले होंगे, लेकिन अभी तक मुझे किसी ने भी जो है वो चले रिस्पॉन्ड तहा ने कर दिया है कि उनको उनके सवाल का जवाब मिल गया है. अगेन गोइंग टू द पॉइंट जो हम बात कर रहे थे कि जो हमारा जो ह्यूमन ग्रोथ हार्मोन है, इट आल्सो रिलीजेस फ्रॉम द anterior pituitary, and it affects on the liver, and with the effects of the insulin like growth factor, the lipolysis will be there. That is a degradation of the lipid and formation of the fatty acids, and then those fatty acids will be used to convert into glucose and to produce the energy by the process of gluconeogenesis. And also the glycogen stores of the liver, they are going to be damaged and draw and cut down into glucose, and that glucose will increases the activity. Glucose will be increases in the level of the blood, and then the activity will be increases. So glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis is occurring for increasing the glucose level of the blood, because the digestive activities are suppressed. We are not having increased rate of the glycolysis at the moment, or Krebs cycle. Digestive activity like further absorption is not taking place. So what happened? It takes place, but not at the increased level. So major of increase in the glucose is not by the normal digestive purpose, but by the gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis. And then the very important ACTH that stimulates the adrenal cortex, the zona fasciculata, to release the cortisol, the major stress hormone. The cortisol is one of the major stress hormone, and when it is releases, it is going to decrease the formation of the lipids and increase the lipolysis. and it also going for gluconeogenesis. It is a protein catabolic hormone, and the protein is going to be converted into amino acids, and those eventually amino acids will be converted to glucose for the increased glucose level in the blood. Then it sensitizes the blood vessels, okay, and in response to the sensitization of the blood vessels will be having more and more nutrients, and the vasoconstriction, vasodilation, whatever it is required, because in the large arteries you will have a vasodilation, because increased blood flow is required for the brain and for the skeletal muscles and for the lungs and for the heart. And in the peripheral blood vessels, vasoconstriction is required to raise the blood pressure. So this sensitization is also governed by the cortisol, and reduced inflammation is there, reduced pain responses is there, reduce in the defensive mechanism of the body is there to cope up with the challenge. So it means that the initial responses which are produced by the adrenaline is now being taken up by the cortisol or stress hormone, and eventually the cortisol stress hormone will be raised in the blood and performing all these jobs. There's another question: is stress glucose in stress glucose level will be increased beside avoiding the carbs diet in the diabetic patients? uh, Yes, it increases, and because of that reason, the diabetic persons are always told not to take stress, because when the diabetic person take stress until and he is having a decreased carb diet, or they are not having carbohydrate in his meal or her meal, but if it is taking the stress, then also with the processes we have discussed earlier of gluconeogenesis and glycogenesis, the blood glucose level will be increased, and that will cause trouble. Okay, so this is there that not this is increased the glucose in the diabetes person if it is taking its stress, is not increased by the diet but increased by the stress responses. So students, this is the stress response, and whenever the stress response is overwhelming, it is not addressed, it is not not meaning beneficial for the system anymore, then it will exhaust the systems, eventually all the systems, and the systems like the liver, it exhausts the liver, is exhaust the skeletal muscles, is exhaust the heart, and resultant will be exhaust the pancreas. Resultant will be different kinds of the diseases and disorders. So development of the endocrine system, as it is also concerned and more concerned with the anatomy. So we are just taking a just look into it. That glands of the endocrine gland system develops all three primary germ layer. We have three germs layers, and from these germs layer, the hypothalamus and the neurohypophyseal bud and the hypophyseal pouch is going to be uh, developed. Now, flow chart of epinephrine और epinephrine से chart से अच्छा जो फ्लो चार्ट स्टार्ट हो रहा है बेटे एपिनेफ्रिन नॉन एपिनेफ्रिन का, ये सीआरएच से स्टार्ट नहीं हो रहा, ये नर्वस इंपल्स से जो ग्रीन लाइन से शो हुआ हुआ ये स्टार्ट हो रहा है। तो सबसे पहले नर्वस सिस्टम जो है फाइट एंड फ्लाइट को इनेबल करेगा, देन इट इज फॉलोड बाय इंक्रीज क्वांटिटीज ऑफ द एपिनेफ्रिन नॉन एपिनेफ्रिन थ्रू द एड्रिनल मेडुला, और फिर जो रेड लाइन से आपको बताया गया ह्यूमन ग्रोथ हार्मोन का, इसी तरीके से टीआरएच का और टीएसएच का, इसी तरीके से सीटीएच का, फिर वो फॉलो करेगा। So you can see through the different drums we have endodrum, mesodrum, ectodrum के through जो है different development stages of the endocrine systems are. अच्छा, अब एक important thing, aging in the endocrine system. Whenever the person's age, that will bring changes into the releases of the hormones. Some hormones are more generated, some hormones are less generated, and some remains the same. For example, more generation of the hormone is generally, for example, if it is up in for example, that the hormones which are related with the stresses, they will be more and more released, but they are resensitized into the system, and the sexual hormones are going to be reduced in the aging. In the females, estrogen, progesterone will be going to be decreased. In the males, testosterone will going to be decreased. Some hormones remain the same, like epinephrine, non-epinephrine. So it means, and also the growth hormone release is also going to be decreased. So initially, more hormones are going to be decreased. Some will be increased, and and the remainings are having normal secretions like epinephrine and non-epinephrine. But eventually the endocrine system with the aging will response have a lesser response than it was in the young stage or in the early stages of the life. So histological changes of the more endocrine glands reduced the fibrous connective tissues with the age, and reduce in the numbers also, that is also going to affect the normal functioning of the body. Then we are we concerned with the uh, effects of the endocrine system with different kind of systems. For example, integumentary system androgen that stimulates the growth of the auxiliary and the pubic hair, and activation of the sebaceous gland is there, and also the MSH melanin stimulating hormone. If it is more and more releases, then it will create darkening of the skin. So these integumentary systems effects are being governed by the hormones. Skeletal system and of its relation with the hormones. The human growth hormone and the insulin-like growth factor stimulate the bone growth of the skeletal system. And then estrogen also causes the closure of the epiphysis. So it means that estrogen is responsible for decreasing, for blocking the primary growth of the body after the closure of epiphysis. Okay. Then the estrogen is not only helping in the body in the mineralization of the bones, and for that reason, after menopause, the women have uh, postmenopausal osteoporosis. Then the PTH hormone, parathyroid, and calcitonin, along with the vitamin D, they are going to regulate the level of the calcium and the phosphate in the bony matrix, and also into the blood. And the thyroid hormones are needed for the normal development and growth of the skeletal system as well. Then we talk about the muscular system. So in the muscular system, the epinephrine and non-epinephrine increases the blood flow toward the muscular system to combat with the challenge and then the fight and flight. And PTH is also going to be increases the calcium which is required for the muscle contraction. Calcium is essentially required for the muscle contraction, and the PTH is responsible for increasing the blood levels of the calcium. Then glucagon, insulin, and other hormones also regulate the metabolism of the muscular system as well. Even growth hormone and insulin like growth factor and thyroid, they maintain the muscle mass and integrity. And also in the males, the testosterone is required for increasing the muscle mass. Anabolic steroids are also going to increase the muscle mass. Then the correlation of the hormones with the nervous system, which are actually having a recap of that. So the nervous system, several hormones, especially the thyroid hormone, insulin, and insulin like growth factor, and growth hormones also, they influence the growth and development of the nervous system. Without them, the nervous system is not going to be prepare itself to cope up with the challenges faced to it. Then the PTH, which is required to increase the calcium level of the blood, it is also required for the generation and conduction of the nerve impulses. So calcium levels are governed with by the PTH, especially in the blood, and it is very helpful for the nervous system's proper functioning. Then the cardiovascular system, erythropoietin, EPO promote the formation of the red blood cells. So when more and more EPO is there, more and more red blood cells is there, more oxygen capacity is there. So indirectly, it is working for the cardio and vascular system. Aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone increases the blood volume. Okay, and when there is more and more blood volume, ANP will decreases the blood volume and the sodium concentration. Epinephrine and non-epinephrine increase the heart rate. This is known as chronotropic effects, and force of contraction of heart, that is inotropic effect. And also the several hormones will elevate the cardiovascular system efficiency during exercise and other challenges. Then the lymphatic system association with the endocrine system, the glucocorticoid, the cortisol or stress hormone, depresses the inflammation and activate and also decreases the immune system for a bit. Also decreases the immune system for a bit, and the thymic and hormone, thymopoietin factor, which are released by the thymus, they are going to mature the T cells, which are specialized WBCs, and then T cells will live there and have a very important immunity function. respiratory system, epinephrine and non-epinephrine dilates or increases the diameter of the airway passages, so there will be more and more oxygen absorption. And erythropoietin also regulates the amount of the oxygen carried in the blood. More erythropoietin, more RBC, more RBC, more hemoglobin, more oxygen carrying capacity. Digestive system, epinephrine, non-epinephrine decreases the digestive system activity. Gastrin, cholecystokinin, secretin, glucose-dependent insulinotropic peptide increase the digestive activity. Calcitriol promotes the absorption of the dietary calcium, as well as the leptin. Cholecystokinin decreases appetite, and ghrelin increases appetite. Urinary system and its control by the homeostasis. ADH, antidiuretic hormone, is responsible for the retention of the water. Aldosterone responsible for the retention of the water. Atrial natriuretic peptide responsible for the excretion of the sodium and water, excessive water. So through that we are having regulations of the plasma level and the fluid level of the body and the sodium concentration as well. That is not only to require for the blood pressure, and also their requirement is for electrolyte balance and ionic balance of the body. Reproductive system is directly concerned and connected with the endocrine system, and through the hypothalamic releasing and inhibiting hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone, the luteinizing hormone, and also the growth hormone and secretions of the gonads from the ovaries and testes, progesterone and progesterone, estrogen